My name's Barbara Buchenau, and I'm welcoming the crowd online and in the room to the final panel of our two-day symposium here in Essen. And a symposium that is bringing together two very distinctive initiatives and also a lot of different disciplines, two life worlds, as I said before. The one world is the world of the transatlantic research on post-industrial scripts. And this is the City Scripts research group that had been funded by the Volkswagen Foundation since 2018. And we're now coming to a happy end. The dissertations are coming to a happy end. The postdoctoral researcher is a professor now, so it has worked really well. And we are very grateful for the Volkswagen Foundation for feeding us during those 2 days and for bringing international scholars to this event. The other thing that we're celebrating with this symposium is the first step in our Aurora University's work on joint education, a very baby step that we're taking towards joint education in the field of urban research. The question is, if we would take our knowledge in our own urban ecosystem, in our own university, but also in our own cities, and connect this across our cooperation among the European universities. So look at Naples and Scampia, for instance, as we did last week, or look at Paris and the work that the École d'Urbanisme is doing in Paris, or take Duisburg-Essen and the Ruhr region, the work that has been done in the City Scripts group. How could this be connected into something that is bigger than what we can achieve individually? And for this new cooperation, we have the support of the University Hospital as well. And I'm very soon very happy to introduce my dear colleague Anke Hinny from the University Hospital, because the question is, can we also breach disciplines? The medical field and the humanities and the social sciences usually work together for very concrete questions, but usually not on a larger scale. And one of the scales that we have found in our conversations is the question of narrative medicine, but also the question of the healthy city as we're investigating it from a humanities perspective and a social science perspective. And with this, I would like to thank the Aurora Universities for allowing us to concentrate on joint education, but B, more importantly, kindly thank the Förderverein, so the Society of the Supporters and Friends of the University of Duisburg-Essen, that they are supporting the idea of an Aurora Fellowship. So the Aurora Fellowship is for each semester, always on a different topic. And for this semester, the Aurora Fellowship is on health and well-being. Hence also the cooperation with the University Hospital. And this Aurora Fellowship comes as a 2-week sojourn at the University of Duisburg-Essen and a task to really work together in terms of education and in terms of research. And as we will learn in the talk by our Aurora Fellow, Markus Zepf, we have already been thinking a lot about things that we can do together. So, and herewith, I now hand over to my dear colleague Anke Hinny, who's the Vice Dean at the University Hospital and also a head of a new institute, a fascinating new institute on gender-sensitive medicine. Welcome, Anke Hinny.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for this kind introduction. And I'm really humbled and honored that I am allowed to introduce our keynote speaker. Actually, Markus, we've got to know just a few days ago, but already we are planning a joint grant proposal, EU grant proposal. Wow, this is not too bad for the beginning. And actually, I have to tell you something. When I read the title, Permanent Autopoietic Process, this autopoietic somehow sounded familiar, but I couldn't really grasp it. And I thought, well, this is from social sciences or so I do not have to understand this. And then really after a while, it occurred to me, this is from biology. It's a term from biology. I'm sorry. And, and then I thought, well, I heard this. During my studies, I heard about this. And I do not have to explain this term here because you all know that. And I tried to recollect, and yes, there was something that I heard it, but it's sort of out of my usual scope because I'm geneticist and I'm doing some sex and gender issues and so on. So let me start by introducing Marcus to you. So he studied architecture and engineering in Munich. And then he proceeded to Lausanne, Switzerland, for his PhD on urban sociology and planning. Really interesting and far off my topic. And then habilitation, University of Lyon in 2004. And then he became lecturer at the National Institute of Technology in Lyon, then became professor in Grenoble, stayed there and became professor in urban planning in Fribourg. And now he has stated that you were dean until 2023, so you have been dean, University of Paris. Okay, and since 2017, you're a professor of urban planning at the Paris School of Planning. So that's for the facts. And I already talked about this autopoietic processes. And actually, well, for biology, you can imagine that there are processes that sort of form organisms and cells and so. But how does this work in cities? I get the idea that this might work in cities as well, but I'm not sure how so. I'm really happy that you will give us really some more details pertaining to that. And as far as I get it from your bibliography, you have 4 major topics you are working on, which is really a lot. So first is urban uncertainties and climate change, and this is the most relevant topic at the moment, I guess. And the second one is local democracy and urban projects. Third one is public spaces and urban policies. And now the last topic pertains to urban environment and health. And this is where we sort of connect. And I really hope that we will work together fruitfully in the future years, maybe 600 years. I know that you have friends that you know for 600 years already. But we know each other for 2 days. And so the stage is all yours.
Thank you very much, Anke, for this very kind and warm welcome and for this fantastic presentation. And so I would like to say that I'm so grateful to be here. I have learned a lot during 2 days because I come from a different discipline. And so I want to thank a lot Barbara, because she's the reason that I'm here. She did a lot of efforts. So that's why I really can appreciate now 2 weeks of very nice discussions. So as Anke said, I had already a lot of talks and discussions, very fruitful. So we thought how we could maybe not change the world, but change some things in our universities. And I also want to thank you, to thank Zora. Where is she, Zora? She's taping me. Okay, Zora, thank you very much, because she did a great job to find me a hotel and to organize all the stuff for coming here. So I want to talk today about adaptable and healthy cities and this crazy permanent autopoietic process. So I will come back on this notion and try to explain a little bit. But at first, I would like to explain you the plan, but I cannot handle the technical stuff, even though I have a technical formation, but it's always difficult. Thank you very much. So the idea, I have to put on my glasses, is to present you a glimpse of how urban planning is developing right now in Paris. So I have 2 points. The first one is to present you concept which is very important actually now, which is called tactical urbanism. And I will show you the initiatives in Paris. So this is a snapshot to present you the context. And then I will talk about the results of first results, I should say, of a research project, which is called Adaptable Cities, Pandemic Mitigation and Crisis Preparedness, where we tried to understand what happened during the lockdown in Paris. So what did people do to change the environment in this very special situation? So these 2 points will give you an overview what happened in the last 5 years. So it's a little bit chronological also. And then I would like to present you the eCity program. It's a research program which I developed since 2020 with a colleague of mine, and she is chemist and specialist for climate, and she's called Isabel Koll. And this deals a lot with the question of urban health and well-being. So we will see what are the results of a students cohort which we installed. So student cohort in the medical sense. So the 42,000 students of my university are invited to take part in surveys about their personal health and their well-being situation. And I will show you some astonishing results of this survey. I cannot speak more because Barbara said to me, not more than 2 hours to speak. Yeah. So I will try to keep it short. And I know that the nice wine is waiting. So Barbara, you will look on the hour and you will tell me, no, now you stop. And so I will try to conclude with something which is very important in my work since 15 years. It's working with uncertainty. So I will try to define what is this type of uncertainty and how does it affect a notion which I call the permanent autopoietic process. So I will leave a little bit the surprise until the end to tell you how I understand autopoietic processes. So let's start with a little definition. We are in academic context, so we have to think about term and to share knowledge. What do we understand when we read this term, tactical urbanism? So I choose the canonic definition, so the first definition when this term appeared in 2015, and it says, tactical urbanism are short-term community-based projects from pop-up parks to open street initiatives, and they have become a powerful and adaptable new tool in urban activists, planners, and policymakers seeking to drive lasting improvements in their cities and beyond. So I think this is very interesting because we talked during these 2 days of a lot of these notions within this definition, but maybe we have to rethink it over. And so what means tactical urbanism in Paris? So at first, it is interesting to have a look of the social spatial disparities. And I want to show you a publication which is coming from our school and which was made by colleagues of the school and shows recent evolutions and major changes in the different parts of Greater Paris territory. And if you look at the map, you will see that there is an overrepresentation of high-income households in the center of Paris, which means when you look at the dark red dots, these are the high-income households. And then you see, and it's even more interesting, there is a concentration of low-income households in the eastern peripheral spaces of Greater Paris. So this is here. And why is this very interesting? Because there is my university. And when it comes to the planning issues of the future, we say in my university, Paris is no more so interesting. There you see the limits of the commune here. But the interesting part of Greater Paris is the eastern and southern part. And so it's important to know this context and to see how the regional and local governments try to respond to this context. And this is where tactical urbanism comes into focus. So we can state, you see a lot of dots here, and these are all projects of tactical urbanism. And for sure, we find some project of tactical urbanism in the very city center of Paris. And these are mostly projects of reshaping public space, for example. But we see also a lot of projects which are going on in this area where I showed the socio-demographical evolution, which is critical. So it will shape in the future this territory and what is happening. So within this initiatives of tactical urbanism, there is a call for innovative projects. And the call is mainly directed to private developers on public properties. And this is a very important economic aspect. And then there is a greater flexibility for planning processes. That means tactical urbanism is less reglementary and gives more space for experimentation. And then there is also an acceleration of the operational phase of the project. It means you can realize more quickly than in a traditional heavy project. And it's also interesting to see that the developers become leader instead of the partners. So they play an important role. And that's why we will see during my presentation how the actor system evolves, and the analysis of this actor systems is very important. And so I said it already, regulatory planning loses impact. New greater groups are joining these initiatives. So there are more and more new actors which try to integrate these initiatives. So there are groups which are doing programming. So they try to initiate future uses and future functions. And the designers are very important, the operators. So what can we learn of this initiatives actually is that the private is consequently replacing public lead. Important lack of citizen participation. This is very astonishing when it comes to these tactical urbanism, which we will try to understand. And what about social acceptability? And what about territorial coherence with the traditional projects? So then the tactical urbanism also has an issue. It's the dealing with the uncertainty. So during these 2 days, we talked a lot about uncertainty. So we know that there are things going on like wars, like pandemic, like economical crisis. And uncertainty means these are things we cannot anticipate. We cannot know. And this is a very important issue for planners because they always want to anticipate. And if you are a good planner, then you try to be serious in anticipation. And when I come to my students and I tell them, forget of anticipation, they tell me, are you crazy? How do we do? So this is my research field, thinking about the idea, how can we deal with uncertainty? So this means a lot experimenting new uses and occupation for unoccupied spaces temporarily. This is very important. This also means that these initiatives are mostly local. And they have the opportunity to give place for emerging situations, evolving temporalities. And there is a growing number of projects in peripheral parts of Greater Paris. And if you look at the dots, it's a little bit difficult to read because it's in French. I will tell you that red dots are cultural spaces, light brown are workspaces, for example, used as a third place. So these are working places, new working places. Brown is shops, restaurants, bar, and clubs. Green is park, green spaces and public space. And light green is urban agriculture and market gardening. And so you see that there's a big variety of dots, which is coming more and more to the eastern part of Greater Paris. And so the question now, which is interesting, is to see what happened, because maybe you saw that this atlas was published in 2020. So the work was done before the pandemic. So they had still nice dreams for the future. It will happen brightly and perfectly. And then came the pandemic. And so I'm lucky that I'm taking part in a research project funded by the British Academy with colleagues from the University of Tokyo and University College of London. And so the grant we got was to see how adaptation of planning regulations and policy guidelines allow swift and prompt changes of use, including ways to engage with local communities and forms of funding during the pandemic. And then we wanted also to see the adaptation of spaces dedicated to mobility, typically streets and sidewalks, and their shift away from car use to other social, cultural, economic, and health-driven purposes. And finally, the adaptation of outdoor and public spaces. This was something which was very popular during the pandemic. So in example, squares and parks and vacant and abandoned lands for more diverse and inclusive community-led uses with a special focus on users' mental health and well-being. So this was the idea. And so we looked at metropoles in the G7. So for instance, we looked at Berlin, we looked at London and Paris and Tokyo and New York. And at first, we had the impression that things were rather comparable. And now I will show you the specific first outcomes of Paris. And then I will tell you why it's specific and why it has a direct link to this evolution of tactical urbanism. So we have to have a little look about the lockdown in Paris, because it was very different to the lockdown in other countries, and especially Germany, because it was relatively short. So you can see that it begins in March 14. And so in March 14, 2020, they locked down, they closed the sport facilities at first. And then in March 16, so 2 days later, they locked down the parks and the green spaces. And then in the middle of March, there was the total lockdown, the national lockdown. And so there was a lockdown, and something is very specific in Paris. Even during the national lockdown, the schools, the public schools, were only locked down 6 weeks, and then they reopened. Yeah? So in France, it was very special, and the idea was we have to have a lockdown which is very short, and we have to reopen quickly. So you see that in May, 11th of May, there was opening of major parks and great boulevards at first. And then 30th May, parks and green spaces. 8th of June, open spaces for sport areas. And lastly, in 22nd June, interior sport facilities reopened also. And then it was over. So let's have a look what happened. So there are some impressions, photos of the national lockdown. So you see parks and green spaces were closed, and also very important infrastructures like Les Berges de Seine, which is an infrastructure which is partly used by cars and partly used also for walking. And this is, for a Parisian person, it's the total catastrophe if this is no more accessible. And then you see public spaces with street furniture, which were also closed. And there was a massive presence of police, because I don't know if you know French people, especially Parisian people, they are not so orderly, and they don't obey so closely to the regulations. And sometimes also they tried to arrange this a little bit in a different way to have sociability, but it was very strict, and the police came and said, no, you cannot do this. Okay, so this was the situation. And what was happening in terms of adaptation during this pandemic, the tactical urbanism in shopping streets guaranteed physical distancing. So this is interesting, because the tactical urbanism was perduring and was adapted to the pandemic. And there were authorization free of charge to occupy more extended portions of public space with temporary and removable structures for restaurants and bar. And temporary pedestrianization of streets may be requested by associations or shopkeepers, and expansion of the cycling. This is a very important thing, and I will show you a map later on with the famous Corona Piste. So these are informal cycling lines, and they popped up everywhere. So I will show you one example of these tactical streets. And there you see how the government, the local government of Paris made regulations to tell people how they can use parts of the streets during the COVID. So we have the first case, the parking space in the street is neutralized and used for social distancing. The second case is parking space is shared with terraces and space for social distancing. The third case is broad sidewalks shared with commerce. And the fourth and last one is adapt pedestrian space and space for cars due to barriers and urban furniture. So you can imagine there are 4 cases and they should regulate everything in Paris. So you can also imagine that this happened not everywhere perfectly. So you have a little photo where people sometimes grab things and use the space in a different way. And what is interesting is that these terraces in the street had an immense popularity and a big success. So around 40,000 cafes, bars and restaurants in Paris, half of which already had a terrace, could install these dispositions. It is estimated that around 2/3 of the cafes and bars and restaurants requested an extension or creation of terrace during the lockdown period. And initially authorized only for summer of 22, these permits were finally extended to June 2021. And then you see, for instance, the pedestrian zones, and there you have, for instance, the blue lines, which are punctual pedestrian zones with terraces which were installed. And we see that there are parts in Paris which profited a lot of this kind of deregulation in Paris. And now the Corona piste, and this is very interesting. These are cycling lines here. Here you see them within the street. And sometimes there were only colored lines on the street to mark the difference between cars and bicycles. And sometimes in very frequented and crowded streets, there were blocks of concrete. And this also changed a lot. You see it here, the image of the city. And I had a delegation of Weimar coming to the school 4 weeks ago. And they were the last time in Paris 10 years ago. And the colleague said to me, Paris has changed. There are bicycles everywhere. We never saw this before. And so this means that also the image of the city has changed a lot. And at the first glance, you can say this is a very positive evolution. And so if you look now at the combined situation, we can see that this bike plan has turned in a long-term program. But when we had our discussions and interviews with the different experts, either from the administration or the political leaders and so on, we learned that all these plans were created before Corona. And so the COVID pandemic was a kind of accelerator to push this politic further and to install, to realize the politic of the mayor, which is to have less cars. She said 2050, there will be no more car in Paris. I don't know if it's possible, but this was the idea. And we see that the biking plan is contributing to this largely. And also the idea of the 15 minutes city model was a test for Paris. So we have a lot of greening and pedestrianization of narrow Parisian streets. And here comes the but. So if you have interviews with citizens and inhabitants in Paris, they are all, not all, but the most of it unhappy. And they say it's chaos, and there are Baustelle, wie sagt man Baustelle? Construction sites everywhere, and there are a lot of accidents, and the most aggressive people are the taxi drivers. They say we cannot drive anymore in Paris. Always these people going with the cycling, with the bicycle and so on. So the people, they are not happy with the situation, but the image is very good. So this is interesting. The question is now, what can we learn from these outcomes from the pandemic? And we see that these evolutions had a significant impact on urban health conditions, especially for students. You have a lot of universities in Paris and Greater Paris area. And for instance, my university is a university where you have to take metro and fast train and so on. And students spend a lot of time, about 30%, take less than 1 hour time in transport. So the transport had a negative effect on students. And so you can easily understand that if there is chaos in Paris and outside with transportation, if it's a soft transportation or public transportation, then it can have an effect on urban health. And that's where it leads me to the ECT program. So you see our little team of the ECT program. So what was the idea of the ECT program? The main aim is to investigate social inequalities in urban health and their determinants. So what we conceived was I'm going too fast. Was a vision at the first time here in the middle. And the vision was the idea that we will not create a barrier, a thematical barrier. We want to have a holistic vision of urban health and environment, which means that we have very different topics which can come into our research project, since we are working with 32 research institutes from our university. So it's mandatory that it's interdisciplinary. And if someone works on alimentation or on air pollution or on well-being, mental health, greening in the city, then they can come into ECT. And they will profit from the cohorts we are installing. So firstly, we created, and this is the center of ECT, a students cohort, which allows us to make regular surveys and to get data. So the idea is also, because when you do research, you always have to have money, is to generate funded projects to do incubation with the research institutes to help them to define their special research questions that they can profit from the cohort, and to write calls for scientific projects. And we have the possibility to have project partnerships with municipalities and regional institutions. For instance, actually, ECT has a research program of aging population in one of the peripheral quarters where the aging population over 75 years old increased more than 80% in 5 years. And so the municipality asked us, can you help us to understand how this population can still participate in urban life and not will be too isolated? So we had to understand what are the conditions of these people, what are the problems, and what are their terms of isolation. And this is an example of projects. We have project partnerships with the territory. And these projects also profit from our students cohort and from the data and from the methodology we worked out to functioning this cohort. And then there are 3 types of results we try to have. So it's first result of fundamental research. It's understanding what's happening. And then it's result for education. So how can we use the scientific outcomes and learnings in teaching? And then we have the third outcome, which is very important for us, is to help to create actions, which means it's kind of co-creating public policies with the municipalities. So, for instance, the project on aging, but it's also to try to empower people that they can understand the issues of urban health and that they can become an active subject. So which means that the citizens and the inhabitants can actively participate in ameliorating their health conditions. So that's why empowerment of the citizens is so important for us. So what is the aim of the students cohort? It's a constant survey in coordination with the university services, so including the campus health service, the Office for Personal Data Protection, the Department for Studies and Life, and so on. And in the first place, we have to create up-to-date data knowledge on health conditions and lifestyles. And then also we try to meet the needs and expectations of the students. So we have to understand what are their problems and how can we help them to meet these needs. And therefore we have a data platform for interdisciplinary research and test and adapt constantly the methodological framework of the cohorts, which means, I give you a short example. For instance, if you do surveys, you cannot send the survey at the moment where the students have exams, because no one will answer. And you cannot make a survey where you send questionnaires with 60 questions, because students will get tired and they say, I don't understand anymore all this thing. And then we cannot get the right data. And also we have to install a relation of confidence with the students. So we have to tell them, if you do this work, what is your return? So there is a very interesting direct return. They get free cinema entrance. They get gifts to gift cards for sport magazines. for sports shops, not magazines, for short sports, and they can become an ambassador of the ECT program, which means that they get via WhatsApp all the renewed informations and informations of things going on in the city or at the university and so on. So this is the aim. And how did we conceive the organization of the students' cohort? So mainly a questionnaire designed with expert and students. So we invited students to take part in the conception of the questionnaire. So the formulation is very, very important to get the right outcomes. And then we had a project launch in consultation with university departments. So the service, health service, the data protection, and the direction of students' life. And we had a lot of festivals and ateliers where we showed what do we want to do. So communication is very, very important. And then the objectives were to have about 2,000 students every year, to have a consecutive membership for the datas. And the idea was to have this cohort about 10 years, because you need a long time to have data which will be consolidated. And we tried to make empowerment with the students and to create also here what we call an active subject. So now I will show you some data, and then I will directly come to the conclusion, because I know the wine is waiting and I don't want to speak too much. So here you have a little example of the survey with some key findings. So these key findings are very hot. They came just out of the oven. And so sometimes we did not establish the links. And when I talked with Anke, and she told me gender is important, I said, oh yes, oh we did not, but we will do. So what are the topics of the survey? So there are 5 topics, and you see each time the topics has a different importance. For sure, health is the most important topic. And then you have socio-demographic characteristics, and each survey is a little bit like this. Then you have 20 questions, very important for studies and student life. So for instance, academic background, workload, university, environment. And then you have environment and quality of life activities. So question about the conditions of housing, the daily mobility, which I mentioned already. And you have the personal situation, very important also, with financial resources, family support, and discrimination. So this is the latest survey. So each time this can change within these 5 topics. And now some findings, and I'm talking under the control of Anke, very important. So first topic I chose was the students' perception of eating habits. So maybe some students will find themselves in the data here. So what was very interesting in the first findings are the financial difficulties related to food. And there you see that 70.5% have low difficulties for food, and 15.6% have medium difficulties for food. This is already notable. And then you have 9.2%, so nearly 10% of the students, they have a high problem, financial problem for food. So when we showed this to the university, they said, what? We have to do something. We don't know how, but we have to do something. And then next thing, the second thing is skipping meals. So 22.2% never skip meals. Then 20.4% seldom skip meals, and 24% sometimes, 60.3% often, and nearly 10% always. And so when we were discussing this, we immediately said, which meal do you skip? It is the breakfast, then it's okay. Or is it at noon, the déjeuner? Oh, that's a problem. And or is it in the evening? So you see, we have a lot of analysis to do to refine this data, to know what are these problems, financial problems, and what kind of habits does it affect. So next impression is mental health perception. So remember, we talk about perception. So the students get the questionnaire, and they had to say, for instance, if they have fears, kind of fears of or anxiety during their studies. And so if we look at the first one, if you had during a period of 2 weeks the feeling all the days or parts of the days that you had depression, or you were sad, or you didn't really feel well. And so this is very interesting, because over 50% had these periods of depression or sadness. So this is an important issue to understand. What are these situations of sadness and depression? Is it because of the experience of the pandemic, or is it because we live in a context globally where you all the time you have bad news and it affects your personal condition? I will come back to this in my conclusion. And then we have the next thing, very interesting. We worked this out with psychologists and medical doctors. And the question is, did you experience noise or voices in your head which you could not explain? And this is very interesting, because you have over 6% which had these experiences. And for medical doctors, so I'm talking under the control of Anke, this is a very important issue. And then what is even more interesting is the last graph. Nearly 30% have panic attacks in situations that are normally not threatening. So if you have a panic attack and you are threatened by someone, then it's normal. But if this is in a situation, a normal situation, then there is a problem. So these are astonishing outcomes, and I wanted to present this like a snapshot, because I have not more 2 hours. But you see on what we are working actually. And so I try to come back to my field, which is the planning. And so we have to ask ourselves how this data can help us to think about the bettering of the spaces in the city. So when we look, for instance, at these results, alimentation and mental health, we can easily relate it to spaces in the university. And we also can think about the infrastructure, the stress which they have when they have in the mobility and so on. So I come to the last two slides of my conclusion. So understanding and sharing and discussing this data, which is generated collectively, helps activating the future in the present. And this is the issue. And I was very happy because in a lot of presentations I heard yesterday and today, we were talking about future, and we were wondering how can we activate this future. And so I have some statements, sometimes sociological, philosophical, and planner statements, which can help us to think of it. For instance, Ernst Bloch, which is a philosopher you might know, says, quote, "The real is a process. The mediation between present, unfinished, and past above all, a possible future." So this is very important for planners, and especially when we deal with uncertainty and things we can easily foresee, not easily foresee, then we have to consider that it's a process, and the process is going on. And this means also that an urban project has not a real beginning and never is finished. When you tell this to a colleague engineer of mine, he will say, please leave the room. It's not possible what you're saying. Then another thing is Hans Jonas, which is also a philosopher you might know, which is has the idea faced with the complexity, because we are always dealing, you saw it in the beginning of my speech, with the situation in Paris. So faced with the complexity of the urban system and the utopian drift that impacts our action under the condition of modern technology, are urban decision makers still able to assume their responsibility? So the idea is, we plan something for the future. We know that what we think today will not fit to the future. And if we decide this today, as a mayor, for example, how can we take this responsibility? We cannot. And then I have a colleague, she's an urban planner in Great Britain, in Newcastle, and she talks about concrete utopia. And she said, if it is a process, and if we cannot take the responsibility, then we have to deal with utopia. But this utopia has to be a concrete utopia. We cannot imagine crazy things and then say, yeah, let's go and let's see and let's spend money on crazy things. But we have sometimes to negate the given. What does that mean? That means that all the restrictions and the limitations and the problems, when people say this is not possible, you cannot do this, we have to negate. And we have to think collectively of utopias we want to consider, and also utopias we don't like. And then we can have a project for the future, knowing that what we are imagining today will not happen. So this is the crazy thing with uncertainty in planning. You have to create utopia, concrete utopia, and you say, we want to go in this direction, and you will make a plan or a nice sketch, but you know that this nice plan and this nice sketch will not be realized because of uncertainties. But if you have this utopia, you can profit from uncertainty. And that's where I am in a fight with a lot of colleagues of mine, scientists in my field, because they say, you are crazy, you have to limit the risk. And you have to limit uncertainty. And I said, no, we have to profit from uncertainty. Because when it comes, then we can think over and we can reorganize ourselves. And then I want to show you a last quotation, which is from an engineer, and it's very interesting. He wrote a book which is called in French, Aimer le futur, love the future. And we already talked about this today when I asked the question, or maybe it was yesterday, in your fields, do you think that future is a menace or it's a possibility for having better situation? And he says, not to tell the open future means to condemn it to the determinism of a past that itself is frozen, a past that has already happened. This is very important. And for me, in my opinion, it's very important for students, at least for my students, because I tell them, you have to forget about everything you hear right now, and you have to reinstall the love for the future and the openness on the future. Because we don't know what will happen today. Maybe good things will happen today. So don't be so focused on the bad context. Something will happen and it will change. And with uncertainty, if you take the uncertainty, you will handle it and you will make something of it. And there I come to my last slide. So I hope I'm still in the 2 hours limit you gave me. It's innovate with uncertainty. And the with is in italic because it's very important. So, and this is the idea of permanent autopoietic process. Permanent because I said a project, normally I don't say project because I hate project, but an urban project has not really a beginning, at least in a metropolitan area where everything you deal with the existence, and has no real end, because when you realize the project, you will realize that you have to adapt it and you have to spend money to redo it. And then autopoietic is, like Anke told us, comes from biology and means in Greek, autos, itself, and poiein, create. And the idea is that, and it's a concept of 2 American biologists, Maturana and Verala, and they said it's a production of indigenous standards to create new forms of organization to handle transformation. So it is not resilience. And they observed societies of animals like bees and ants, and they discovered that these societies, they love the future, and they have the possibility to react within the context of changes, and they can adapt. So, for instance, in this society, they can say, you're a policeman, we don't need so much policemen anymore, you will join the people who gather food. And you are someone who takes care of the organization of the society, and now you will help us to find new sources of food. So trying to reorganize and to reinvent the society. And I had the idea that this might be interesting for urban planners. So we could say in urban planning, the autopoietic process is to deal with uncertainty and to regularly reinvent our practices and to create new referentials, which means either in instruments like plans, like schemes, like regulation, but also in the reorganization of the actor system. So for me, it's a work in progress approach, refined with the help of experimentation and test layouts put to the test of real use. So it's not to stop to build in the city and to realize projects, but it's to test. And this has an impact of the type of constructions we do. It has an impact of the materials. They have to be sustainable, they have to be adaptable, they have to be hybrid. And I would like to invite you to look at a very interesting project. It's Wohnprojekt Wien in Vienna. So you have here the link. And they created a sociocracy and they installed in their project the possibility to reinvent progressively. And so I come to my conclusion where I wanted to share with you some key aspects which seem to me very interesting also in this debate of these 2 days. So the idea of reinventing permanently the frames of references, governance, instruments, procedures, instrument, make 2 times instruments, I'm sorry, so important for me. Share understanding of stakes, so established shared language, and that's what we did during the 2 days. We shared language. There is no common language because we will not understand each other at 100%. It's not possible, but we can share. It's the idea of Habermas. It's intersubjectivity and so on. And then we have to create, in my opinion, permanent access to information and learning platforms. So this is the example of e-city. And we might identify scales of values. So discuss and share the diversity of values, economical, cultural, sentimental, technical, and so on. This is often a problem in a urban project because these values are in the heads, but they are not shared. Then reassessing and reinterpretation frequently of the sets of data. That means what we saw of the outcome of the survey of the students, we have to reassess it constantly with the help of other disciplines. So I had the big luck to meet Barbara and to meet Anke, and they showed me you have to reassess. It's very important. And finally, processing incrementally and experiments with prototypes. So this is a little bit the elements which I wanted to share with you, and maybe we can think of it for the future to create a more adaptable and sustainable city. Thank you very much for your attention.
Much for this excellent talk. Wow, I have to process now. This one. That's better? Okay. So again, thank you very much for your talk. I really have to process all the data that you supplied. Should we sit down?
We won't stay long.
It's very cozy here. Sorry. I especially like, as you can imagine, the questionnaires you did with your students, and actually you sort of touched some of my disciplines. Like as you know, I'm in the psychiatry field and I'm dealing with eating disorders. And you showed that so many of the students skip meals all the time. I mean, some seemingly due to financial reasons, but others possibly because of an eating disorder. And even more astonishing, the high rate of depression that, well, it's not really depression, it's a depressive episode for a short period of time, but we do not know if it takes longer or stays longer, sort of. And again, these voices that they hear, so somehow schizophrenic pattern there. Well, I wouldn't have expected in this frequency, really. If you know that schizophrenia has a frequency of 1% in the population, so, and you see 6% in these students, this is much more than I would have expected. And so I think what I do learn from these data is that we do have to have a closer look at our students and to really evaluate a lot of these facets with questionnaires, which is, well, if I say quite easy, then it's not really the case. It shows you that I didn't do this so far. But with our techniques nowadays, you can at least give these questionnaires to the students quite quickly. And then, of course, the response rate is not 100%, but still you get indications of the field that you might try to intervene and try to change, really. And to have an environment where they are not that frightened any longer because they are anxious and depressed and so, and really this shouldn't be the case. So there's a lot to do. And I'm looking forward to this sex-specific analysis. So,
and I think the what I really enjoyed about the fact that you're A, gathering data, but B, you're encouraging all of us to actually not expect ourselves to come up with an intervention that then solves a problem, but rather says, well, as we are in the world, there is this uncertainty, there is a lot of things that we suffer from, and how can we address the fact that we do, and how can we move forward? So how can we learn to embrace the fact that we cannot plan for the next step? And I think that's what we've been maybe in our work focusing too much on. So the extent to which we feel scripted, the extent to which we feel that there's a certain drive towards a very specific kind of future. And your work has indicated that we could maybe re-embrace the fact that there's no necessity that the future is what seems to be mapped out from the past. I would like to open up the floor very briefly for the audience to get back to us, but also welcome Petra Günther, who's the head of the international office of the University of Duisburg-Essen. And thank you for allowing us to bring Markus Zepf to Duisburg-Essen, because without the Aurora Fellow and the fellowship concept that was invented at the international office, we would never be able to do this here. And also to dream of these crazy kind of interactions where the university hospital, the humanities, and the social sciences in Paris can maybe come up with an idea of doing something that maybe doesn't work, but that at least tries to do something. And so I'm opening up the floor to maybe responses, questions by the students. I know the students must be totally exhausted. And I see Katie.
Yeah, somehow my head got stuck on the example of the bike lanes, because this is basically an experiment, right? So like they were trying something, but is the problem that citizens weren't involved in this process of creating this project? Because for me, it sounds like awesome, because I guess people did enjoy these pop-up spaces where like the cafes and things, but maybe it was like it felt different. And I was wondering, like, if we create these experiments, how do they have to be created, with whom and how? And then what do we do if an experiment fails? And yeah, that's my question.
It's a very, very important question because you saw the inside perception and the outside perception. And I think Paris is a very particular case because of the political administration system, where the mayor has a very strong power. And if a mayor has an idea, strong idea, then he has or she has a strong impact to realize it, even if for the administration, sometimes it's difficult because they know the problems to realize. And so the pandemic, you know, was a very specific situation. And the local government saw the possibility to realize things easier and more rapidly than before the pandemic. So the regulamentations went down and the possibilities were greater and so on. And a strong urban policy could be implemented very fastly. Yeah? And so there was no participation process because you know what happened during the lockdown. So it was not really possible to participate. And when you have urban fabric like Paris, then you don't have a lot of space. Yeah? And if you divide a narrow street and you put an informal biking line, then you can foresee that there will be problems. And this also is an issue of inequity. So I thought of this. And some people, they profit from these measures and others no. Yeah. And so when I talked about the 14,000 cafes and bars and so on, then there were a lot of people, they profited. But are these people which are living in the neighborhood? Are these people which are living somewhere else where there is no bars and no cafes and they enjoy it because they are quiet at home and they can come here? Or are these people which frequently comes because they work there and for them it's nice to have a drink after a situation of work, Zoom all the day? So you have to consider the winners and the losers. And in this complex system, it's very difficult. And that's why you hear so different voices. And when I had a discussion with experts of Paris coming to the mobility in the streets, so we ask with my colleagues of the research projects, what have you learned from the pandemic for preparedness for the future, for coming crisis? And how will you deal with the next pandemic? And then they said, pandemic, it's over. We did it well and it's good. And now we're thinking of Olympic Games. And this was very interesting for us because they dealt with a crisis. And instead of saying, maybe this type of crisis will come again, and how do we react better and in a more adapted way, and how do we prepare citizens and talk with citizens, they say, no, we skip. Now it's Olympic Games and it's security, our issues. And when we ask if pandemic comes, what will you do? Then they said, we will do the same or better.
Self-aggrandizement. I will take one more question from Cornelia, and I think we will then call it a day because the students are really very brave. Or if I take a student question, Cornelia.
Is there a student question first?
No. Thank you very much. So that was very impressive and very interesting, highly interesting. And I was just struck by something that sounds a little bit like a paradox, namely that on the one side, I see that and I see this everywhere, we are more and more data driven. So we collect more and more data to be more certain about what is happening. But then you say, but this is about uncertainty. And so this struck me. And do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. It's a very, very important question. And I thank you for this question. And it helps me to precise. So this data, what was created with a qualitative method. Okay, so and the idea what we have, and I was very happy because I heard this today and yesterday, is to know how can we quantify qualitative data. So the idea is not in the traditional way to create a lot of data and then to be certain now we know and it's perfect and we can do, but to know better what the people with whom we are working. And if I remember well, you said today something which was very important to me. You said we have to work with the people and from the people and so on. And that is the idea. So we have to get reactions. Maybe data is not the right word, but we treat it as data, but we have to have perception, reaction from people. And they have to tell us, look at this. You didn't look at this as a scientist. And this is important. And this is not a paradox to uncertainty, because when I started the eCity program, the president and the university said to me, we want to know our clients, because they didn't know really well. And that's a big problem. Yeah. And if I don't know my clients, and if I don't know from what they are suffering and what are their living conditions, and I tell them, you have to study and go on, and we don't care how you live. And so it's not possible. So, and this is also a kind of approach to deal with uncertainty, because the clients tell us there is something we cannot explain, and it's today, and tomorrow maybe it's different. So it's dealing with. So I hope I could.
Is there a final student voice? Yes, Jonas, I knew.
Yeah, I also have a question about this concept of uncertainty, because I thought about this factor of wealth, right? So people can that have wealth can make up for uncertainties that occur, and people who are less wealthy face more uncertainties in their everyday life already. And how do you think how do you or would you have a recommendation on how to communicate to these people that face a lot of uncertainty in their everyday life and have a very negative connection to this uncertainty, and don't have this, optimistic, let's head into the future and see what happens? How would you recommend we communicate this positivity that lies in this uncertainty?
This is also a very, very important question. And it leads to me to an inside story of the eCity program. A little bit embarrassing inside story. Because when we started the idea of cohorts, we said, okay, we do first the student cohorts, and then immediately after this, we do general population cohorts in the eastern and southern part of Greater Paris, there where I showed you the socio-demographic evolution. And my dear colleague Isabel and I, we dreamt already to have 150,000 inhabitants talking to us about their different situations. And one of the keywords of city is equality and inequality. So the idea was we start with the students and then we rapidly have our cohort, easy. And then we go to the next step and we do the general cohort. And then we touch everyone and we will touch the problems of inequality, and we will try to empower people who are in low income situation, low education situation, and so on. And this is still our goal. But you might know, maybe you shut up the micro now, that the university always has a problem with money. So you have to know that a normal cohort is a very expensive thing. So if you want to create a cohort, then you need at least 700,000 or $1 million per year. And when I tell this to my president, he says, find them. It's a good idea, find this money. And it's not so easy to find this money spontaneously. But since my president, and I like him very much, said to me, you have to think about the Framingham cohort. I don't know if you know, it's one very important cohort coming from the United States. And it lasted till today. It began, I don't know, I don't remember, maybe 50s or 60s, but I don't know, but long time. And so he gave me the mission to do the work for 50 years. So I don't know if I see the end, but the idea is this. And so we still want, we still have the goal to do the general cohort.
I think you're not answering his question.
Not answering question?
No, I think
I'm sorry.
the question really is, but we will take this to the wine. I think the question is, if uncertainty is something that I can handle when I'm comfortable, what do we do with the fact that that this is a luxury, right? So a luxury to embrace uncertainty. You need a certain kind of stability in order to say, I think that's what you're, right? So with the, so he was taking this final idea that we should try to rethink planning and planning for uncertainty, which I think is totally correct. But at the same time, on the individual level, it's a very hard call because it is a fine call if I have certain stabilities and certainties. But it's hard when I'm living in a very uncertain life already, right?
Let me say one phrase. I'm sorry, I thought I would have answered, but it was not precise enough. So we think that everything is in empowerment. So if we have this cohort and we can reach people who are poor or in bad situations and so on, then we can help them to empower. That's the idea. For instance, I have a colleague, a medical doctor. She tells me everyone in public health says to the citizens, you have to eat 5 fruit every day. And then she said, I'm so angry because there are people, they cannot afford 5 fruit every day. So how can you dare to tell them? And that's where we want to work. So we want to work with this population and ask them, can you afford 5 fruits? If you don't, maybe we can have an alternative. Maybe we can help you. Maybe we can find ways to sensibilize politicians and so on and so on. So that's our goal, to work on this issue. I hope I precised a little bit.
All right. Thank you all so very much. I mean, you've been a very brave audience. And I should give a big shout out to the group that came in from Amsterdam. So you've done 2 formats today. Thanks for being here. A shout out to our group from Baltimore who've already gone to dinner. I should say. So we know that friends of us who've been in this room are having dinner or basically are doing dessert, which means we need to get our wine and then we need to go home very soon. Thank you so much for being here and for all of your great contributions. And thanks for everybody who's funded this. And a shout out to Zora, who's on the Zoom. We see her. Zora, it's great to have you. And thank you so much for pulling this up together with us. And a great shout out to the student helpers. Can I ask you to get up and let people know who you are? Not everybody's in the room, but Jonas, Saskia, Lena, Leon.
Hi, from upstairs.
There's Yule. So almost all of us are still here. And I thank you all for being here and doing this with us. It's been a great experience. And I hope that you still breathe scripts and urbanity from here on. Thanks all, and let's have a wine.